Guten Tag, WAP. This is Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we go over Unit 4, Day 4. Today we're going to talk about the Roaring Twenties and some cultural and social changes in the Roaring Twenties. But let's get started with our daily punishment. Sure, I drink brake fluid, but I could stop any time. Key terms for today: Roaring Twenties, the League of Nations, fascism, Benito Mussolini, the British Commonwealth, the March on Rome, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and the Treaty of Westminster. We're going to go over America after World War I, the rise of fascism in Italy, and Eastern Europe post-World War I. So let's start talking a little bit about the cultural changes in the 1920s. The 1920s were called the Roaring Twenties because of huge cultural and technological changes and social shifts around the world, starting in America. It was a period of apparent peace in the early 1920s. There was reduced internal political tensions in Europe. However, there were starting to be extremist groups on the right and left. You had the rise of communist parties in Europe, and you are going to start to see fascist parties develop in the mid-1920s. The economy is going to be booming for most of this time period in the 1920s. There's going to be an increase in consumer demand. It's an age of new technological inventions. These technological inventions are going to be consumer products. You have the radio, the airplane, the automobile. Radio is for consumerism, airplane, auto are for travel. You have new types of culture. You have talkies, movies that actually have sound. You have new music styles like jazz music. New artistic styles like Dadaism and Surrealism. Bajas, which is an architectural style, and Cubism. These art styles were often very like avant-garde and kind of like very against mainstream styles. You have new types of literature that deal with realism. They're often pessimistic. Example of this is the 1920s is The Lost Generation. You have F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby, who talks kind of about the superficiality of life in the Roaring Twenties. Sinclair Lewis did the same thing in his book Babbitt, where like the superficiality of middle American life. Women across Europe and America are going to gain the right to vote. There'll be new dance styles during this time, like the Charleston. It is a period of cultural thriving. The new women in the 1920s are called the flappers. They're semi-independent. They smoke, they drink, they go out on their own. They get the right to vote. They're semi-economically independent. The League of Nations was created after World War I. Its goal was to create world peace and to maintain it. It's going to be dominated by France and Britain. It's used to isolate Germany. Germany was not allowed in the League of Nations at first. However, the League of Nations had no army and it had no power to enact its decisions. Also, America was originally after World War I, it's the most powerful nation, and America is not going to join the League of Nations. There were some idealistic goals in the League of Nations that they're going to set up. They're going to attempt to disarm nations, to reduce the size of navies, the 5-power treaty, the 4-power treaty, limit the amount of arms. They're going to sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which is going to outlaw war. It's kind of very naive. You can't really outlaw war. And what do you do if somebody breaks that? Oh, I'll stop you with my army. Oh, wait. We don't have an army. But during this time in the 1920s, many nations will reduce their militaries to minimum levels. Fascism is going to develop in Italy in the 1920s. Italians were nationalistic. Some of them were angry from World War I. They felt like they deserved more land. Remember, Italy joined the Allies. They betrayed the Central Powers in World War I. They were promised more land where they thought they were, and they didn't feel like that was honored in the Treaty of Versailles. In fascism, it's a totalitarian government. A totalitarian government is a government that has total control. They're going to be a dictatorship. There's usually one person in charge in fascism. It's ultra-nationalistic, a dictatorship, Totalitarian government. The government has control over the economy, propaganda. They arrest people and kill people that disagree with them. It's a one-party state. Italy's going to become fascist. Nazi Germany will also become fascist. The difference with Nazism is in fascism, it's ultra nationalistic. Uh, Nazism is also going to be nationalistic, but it's more about your genetics. Like, even if like Jews were born in Germany, that wasn't important to them. It was about like your fatherland, like your genes, your genetics, what race or ethnicity you are. In fascism, the goal is to seize power forcefully. Very extreme nationalists. I wake up in the morning, I say Italy, then I punch a French person. Italian fascists will rise in the 1920s. In 1922, the fascists, led by Mussolini, will do a march on Rome. They'll advocate a nationalist corporate state. They wanted to end both socialism and capitalism. The king of Italy is going to panic and give in and name Benito Mussolini the prime minister. He will become the Duce, or leader of Italy. He'll never have the same kind of power that Stalin or Hitler had, but he will be a dictator. Mussolini will begin to reform the Italian state. He'll rearm, and he will create a secret police that will punish and kill his opponents. They're called the Black Shirts. Let's talk about Eastern Europe after World War I. Eastern European nations will rise after World War I in the former Austria-Hungarian Empire. A lot of these states will try to emulate Western Europe. However, they won't have wealth or stability. All of them are going to be very hostile to the Soviet Union, Communist Russia. Some of these states will turn to authoritarian governments. There's going to be too many parties in parliamentary democracy, and some of these democracies won't function. So some of them will revert to authoritarian, like dictatorships led by generals, like in Poland, or monarchies. Only Czechoslovakia will remain a functioning democracy throughout this whole period. Let's talk about what's happening to Britain after World War I. Britain's going to grant some of their territories dominion status. The dominions are going to be mostly white-dominated governments where most of the people in the colonies were white, so South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. For the most part, the dominions are going to be independent, but they have to follow the same foreign policy and trade policies, so like tariffs, as Great Britain. But they're going to be given more independence. Ireland's going to be a little different. Ireland started to revolt against Britain during World War I. Ireland wants its independence. Afterwards, the Irish Republican Army, which was created by Michael Collins and Eamon de la Vella, are going to start to do terrorist acts and assassinating British leaders in Ireland. They're going to lead a war against the British in the during World War I in the 1920s. The British will eventually agree to partition Ireland. South Ireland will become its own country, and North Ireland, which was predominantly Protestant, will remain part of Britain. The South will be called the Irish Free State, and it will be a self-governing dominion. The Irish Republican Army is going to resent this compromise. They want all of Ireland to be independent, and they're going to turn to more terrorism. Canada, Australia, New Zealand will be granted dominion status. Canada will have rapid economic growth, large-scale immigration, and it'll be increasingly friendly with America. In the Treaty of Westminster in 1931, Britain and its dominions are going to form a permanent political alliance. It's going to tie those dominions with Britain as far as like foreign policy. The British Commonwealth will be created. As mentioned, the Treaty of Westminster will give the dominions more independence for the most part. It'll create a permanent political alliance. There still will be some overlap for foreign policy and trade. All these dominions in Great Britain are going to form an alliance system. It's called the British Commonwealth. It's made up of Britain and its former colonies that achieve independence. The original Commonwealth was like Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all of them. After 1959, the British Commonwealth is going to be made up of more recently independent countries that are non-white, like Pakistan, India, not Indonesia, Singapore, stuff like that. They have a common monarch like Queen Elizabeth II, but it's mostly symbolic, the British Commonwealth. After World War I, America is going to dramatically change as a country. World War I will put America in a position of leadership. It will become the largest industrialized nation and will have the largest center of banking. It will leave the war with the second largest navy and the largest army in the world. After World War I, America will be the most powerful nation in the world. It will surpass Great Britain. However, not all Americans were happy with World War I. They felt like they were tricked into the war. There was no purpose for it. Americans are going to become more isolationist, where they don't want to get involved in European problems. Woodrow Wilson is going to refuse to take any Republicans with him to the Treaty of Versailles, and the Republican Senate is going to reject the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The U.S. will refuse to join the League of Nations, and it will retreat into a period of isolationism. The only area in foreign policy America will really get involved in is intervening in Latin America and installing pro-American dictatorships that support American businesses in the 1920s. America will be also very afraid of communism, and in the 1920s, America will go through the first Red Scare. There were some terrorist actions, like the Attorney General Palmer's house was bombed, and there's going to be an outwave of anti-communism in America. They're going to pass laws that allow Americans to, the Espionage and Sedition Act, that allow people to be arrested for speaking out against the government. A lot of these things were unconstitutional. They actually deport some communists away from America, which is super unconstitutional. People will be locked up for their political beliefs. There's going to be some trials, like the big trial Sacco and Vanzetti. They were Italian anarchists who were accused of murder. They actually had somebody that saw them somewhere else during the murder, but they were still convicted and they were executed. So it's kind of like the paranoia of the Red Scare. And America is going to become very afraid of communism during this time, during the first Red Scare. All right, guys, that's all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, deuces.